I think, despite the targeted demographic and when these episodes aired, that if a show is going to have an episode tackling racism, the everlasting effects it's had on the country, along with the mistreatment of African and Black American slaves, along with their descendants, then it should come from a place of understanding said history they are pulling from, and what we can do today to right the wrongs of the past while also healing towards a better future of those burdened under systematic oppression. I'll be taking a look at 2 shows that tried their hand at discussing these issues and what we, as an audience, can ultimately learn how to not approach such a daunting topic, but also learn from the proper execution of tackling such topics. I'll be pulling in an episode each from 2022's The Proud Family Revival series Louder and Prouder, and from 2009's The Cleveland Show. I'm aware that both of these shows have their differences, straight down to who was in the writer's room, who's their demographic, and when they aired. But oddly enough, they tackled the same issue revolving around a Confederate leader's statue being preserved for their horrendous legacy and combating it. And you'll never guess which one I think did it better. In The Proud Family Louder and Prouder Season 2, Episode 10, titled Juneteenth, Maya, a new addition to the cast who's meant to be an archetype of a young, woke, by its actual definition, Black girl that stands for equality for her people. But she has an unlikable, know-it-all, holier-than-thou personality that I can't personally stand. I think she's the worst kind of person to represent this archetype and just thinks she's the loudest and smartest one in the room when she doesn't do jack of all nothing. Except in this episode where it's actually relevant. Her, along with Penny and her friends, protest against the legacy of their town of Smithville's founder when they learn that he was a slave owner. And in The Cleveland Show, Season 2, Episode 15, titled The Blue, the Gray, and the Brown, Cleveland's nostalgia for his small town of Sullivan, Virginia, gets manipulated into helping preserve a statue of the city's founder, who was a slave owner. Are we seeing the parallels yet? The episodes share the same premise of a racist legacy being preserved, and our hero's goal is to dismantle it. Solid idea, interesting foundation, but as you'll see, it's all a matter of execution. Since it's set in the modern day, I'll start with what I think Louder and Prouder got right, got wrong, and where it could have improved with this episode. Now, I will applaud the episode starting with the kids behind bars after their peaceful protest was broken up as they chant for change and not letting their voices be silenced. Very real, very modern, and reflects the harsh realities that peaceful protesters face. We flash forward a week prior and learn that one of Maya's dads, Barry, is a direct descendant of the town's founder, Christian A. Smith, and will be honored at the unveiling of his ancestor's statue. I enjoyed Maya's healthy skepticism of Smith's lack of digital footprint, cluing us in on his possibly shady wrongdoings that would otherwise ruin his legacy if they came to light. It's like when we were kids and learned that in 1592, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But thanks to our ability to learn past biased, outdated textbooks, we now know that his discovery of America wasn't as friendly as they first portrayed it. So good on Maya for wanting to learn more of the historical figures we put on a pedestal, as well as the rest of the kids getting rightfully outraged for not being taught the full story of their history, and including the kids publicly protesting against the statue at the ceremony, to sadly be arrested by cops in riot gear. I honestly did find these elements of the episode were handled very well, and reflected the struggles of combating injustices and how staying ignorant of history can keep the legacy of these awful figures alive. However, while I think the setups were great, the deliveries are where it fell flat for me. For one, I was indecisive with where I land when it came to how Barry was handled in this episode. Firstly, I didn't like how it made him out to be in the wrong with the use of white fragility, which is defined by the discomfort and defensiveness on the part of a white person when confronted by information about racial inequality and injustice. And while yes, with that my people line, they had something going with that scene, but Barry rather just seemed shocked and confused. If that scene was just a bit tighter, I think it would have gotten the point across much more clearly.
I just know that my people wouldn't have done anything like this.
But the scene that ultimately drove me up a wall was when Barry was trying to use his white privilege to save the kids from getting arrested since he's also an officer. But that didn't work at all, which feels like mixed messaging to me. So I don't know what they're trying to say about white privilege. Is it something that could be used to aid in the healing of racial inequality, or just something that could be stepped on by a larger group of authority? Secondly, the inclusion of Emily, who only Maya could see until the very end, was unnecessary and felt kind of disrespectful. This revival plays up the fantastical aspect of the Proud family to the point where the lines of what's real or exaggerated are blurred. If Maya had accidentally dug up the old diary on her own, found out about the plantation and the founder that way, it would have been more impactful and goes to show how clever slaves had to be in order to hide their truths until it could come to light eventually. While I could nitpick that most slaves didn't know how to read or write, so Emily having this diary to begin with wouldn't make much sense, but keeping in mind that slaves had to constantly hide their intelligence and capabilities from their owners because it was a matter of life and death. At the end of the episode, a month passes, and not only did they rename the town, but also erect a statue in honor of Emily. All that legislation being done within a month is truly a work of fiction, because it would normally take months, if not possibly years, to get any of that done. Paperwork aside, because no kid is trying to watch any of that, naming an entire town after a seemingly random slave instead of, say, the indigenous people for whom this land rightfully belongs to, just did not sit right with me. Also, the use of the Wakandan imagery in music felt like an aesthetic choice rather than something meaningful, and felt very out of place to me because Wakanda was never colonized. But I guess the discussion of black ancestors wouldn't be the same without it, now would it? And it ironically being another reminder that we're Disney. We own that too. We own everything. This episode had a strong premise, but lacked the confidence in those scenes, or just didn't make much sense. Which is a shame because there's not much tweaking needed in order to make this episode stronger. Instead of making Barry the antagonist of the episode, it should have been the history teacher. She was already being short with Maya and has more of an implicit bias in favor of the statue. It would also hammer in how little of real history was never taught to the kids by her, as well as showing outdated textbooks in her class. That would have really sold the message for me. Also, I feel that Wizard Kelly could have played a bigger role in all of this, as he is a capitalistic black man who's also the mayor, who didn't seem bothered by the news of the founder because it was 400 years ago. Get over it, y'all. The Wiz is perfect for the social commentary on wealthy black men that forego their roots to appeal to their upper-class white counterparts and does nothing to uplift their people with their newfound privilege. Now, to take a look back to 2009 with the Cleveland show and what this episode got right, got wrong, and where it could have improved. I thought it was fun how the episode expressed Cleveland's nostalgia for his small town of Steuben, Virginia, just showing how much he truly does love and care for his town and the people within it. Confronting the mayor on the importance of their small town values that established a loving community that has importance and shouldn't be erased from their history. Ironically, something he'll regret later. Because it's Cleveland's very nostalgia that gets manipulated by B. Emerson Plunkett, head of the Steuben Preservation Society and a direct descendant of the town's founder, into preventing the destruction of his ancestor's statue. But unknowns to Cleveland, before it's too late, he realizes that his small southern town has a dark, horrible racist past. Oh, the power of nostalgia. Prioritizing good memories while also looking at the bad ones through rose-tinted glasses. I mean, the fact that Emerson and his whole group are a bunch of rich white Confederates was a massive giveaway. What I love most about this scene was that the mayor was about to tear down the statue, and Emerson mentioned earlier that people had an issue with it being up to begin with, which tells me that some groups in Steuben knew about the founder's past and have been working to get the statue torn down. It's not some hidden secret, and the people on both sides have been publicly pushing against each other. It's just a matter of who's aware versus who isn't. That's why woke, by its definition, is good. To be aware of these things. With the encouragement of his wife Donna, Cleveland fights back against Emerson and doesn't allow the racial injustice of the past to thrive in the town he loves. Cleveland joins the Civil War reenactment of the Battle of Steuben, but to win it for the North. His Confederate-raised, redneck bumpkin racist friend Lester doesn't join him at first, but after spending time with those upper-class white folks, he decides to join forces with Cleveland and even saves his life in the reenactment. This was a major turning point in the episode for Lester, because although he and those Confederates have similar ideas and values, they come from very polarizing ends of classes. he has nothing else in common with them and much prefers Cleveland's company. They won the war and in their drunken merriment tried tearing down the founder's statue, but they got fined for damages and had to put it back up. As the narrator said,
"It is the South, after all."
Which, as much as I'm for dismantling the monument of a racist, it's property of the state and carries heavy fines to do so in the non-legislative way. I'm sure if they wanted to get the statue officially torn down, they could petition in protest. If it was gonna get torn down in the first place, I'm sure it could happen again. Now, as for the wrongs and improvements, I actually don't have any. While I'm aware that the Cleveland show didn't have the most colorful writer's room at the time, I feel that they tackled the topic of this episode very well, and it was still very entertaining. The perfect hybrid of edutainment. Cleveland's nostalgia being manipulated by an elitist racist preservation society and defeating them in a Civil War reenactment to win for the North was very satisfying. Because although the South won that war years ago, that doesn't mean we can let them win again now. Most likely not the writer's intentions with the message, but I find this interpretation meaningful and hopeful if it can encourage others to combat racial injustices. So yeah, I feel that this episode got more right than it got wrong and doesn't really need improving. Probably because they pulled from actual history. While I can harp on and criticize how these episodes are written and executed in their messages, I brought my friend, the walking historical, actually fact checker, TheGreatBurg, who can analyze and break down the show's use and or mishandling of actual history.
Okay, so this is probably gonna get my black card revoked, but screw it. I never watched Proud Family growing up.
You what?
Boo this man! Yeah, sorry guys, but Proud Family didn't really interest me as a kid and wasn't my thing. However, as I got older and met people who loved this series growing up and learning more about it, I come to respect this series for what it did. That being said though, Penny's friend still ain't shit. When I heard the revival Louder and Prouder was coming out, my initial reaction was that of... That being said, while I wasn't interested, I was still happy for the people who enjoyed the show. But then season 2 came out and that's when the controversy started to appear. Especially on a certain topic.
Slavery!
Oh, right. I am so embarrassed.
Now, when artist came to me about this video, she told me about this particular episode, asking for my advice on how accurate and respectful it was to actual history. Because I didn't watch the show, I did not know what to expect, but I sat down and watched the episode, and oh my god, I hated this episode so much. Now keep in mind, Proud Family is no stranger to talking about these types of topics. That being said, this episode pissed me off as it was filled with half-truths and omissions. So let's start off reason why. So from what I've been told, the Proud Family takes place in California. But there is one teensy problem with that. California never had slavery. Well, they did when the Spanish enslaved the natives, but not in the sense of American slavery involving black people. I mean, yes, they did have African slaves, but more regulated to Central and South America along with the Caribbean. It's the reason why Latin American countries like Cuba, Colombia, Brazil, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic have a large Afro-Latino population. Anyway, back to California. Now, California does have an intensely racist history. From the eradication of the native population to taking land away from the Mexicans, the mistreatment of the Chinese, and Los Angeles alone has done so much to black people. But slavery wasn't one of them. In fact, California joined the United States as a free state to balance out Texas, which was a slave state, which we'll get more into that later. And Cali was a part of the Union during the American Civil War. Another factor is that they say that the town was founded in 1827, but California was not a state until 1850. And even when it was a part of Mexico, slavery was illegal there, which was one of the reasons why Texas broke away from Mexico. Another thing was how they handled the origins of Juneteenth. See, they were all over the place with this one, saying that Juneteenth happened when the Emancipation Proclamation was enacted, but that's not true. The Emancipation Proclamation was enacted on January 1st, 1863, 2 years and 6 months before Juneteenth was a thing. It claimed that slavery was not illegal in the Confederate States. The only exception were the border states of Maryland, Delaware, Missouri, Kentucky, and West Virginia. These are states that stayed in the Union but kept slavery, and they do mention that in the episode. However, as time went on, the border states would abolish slavery before the end of the war. Which leads me to my next point. The American Civil War ended in April 1865, 2 months before Juneteenth. You see, for the rest of the spring of 1865, there would still be pockets of Confederate resistances and holdouts to keep on to slavery. The most prominent of these holdouts would be, you guessed it, Texas, where would be the last Confederate state to surrender in June 1865. On June 19, 1865, the slaves, realizing they're finally free, celebrating this day. So had the Proud Family taken place in Texas, this episode would have made more sense since after all, Juneteenth's origins are in Texas, and it has the towns and cities that are named after slave owners, with Houston being the most famous. There's even a giant statue of Sam Houston in Huntsville, Texas. But you know what? I can forgive all of that, if it was just entertaining. That's the worst part. This episode was so preachy and full of itself. It acted like it was the smartest person in the room, but in reality, it had no idea what they were talking about. That they want to be down with the cause, but they don't have a single clue what it's all about. And that's why this episode infuriated. But I think it's time to move on to something better. So unlike Proud Family, I did watch the Cleveland show when it first came out, and like everyone else, I thought it was inferior to Family Guy. I think everyone was too hard on it, as being a spin-off of the said Family Guy made people have high standards for this show. And yes, the first season was trying to find its footing, but over time it began to find its own identity and move away from its more popular and white counterparts. Which is why I think it was a shame when it was cancelled. But anyway, let's get into the episode, and there's one thing that helps it out. And that's its setting. So Cleveland's hometown is in Virginia, which was a part of the Confederacy. In fact, I would say it was a major player in the CSA. Most of the battles in the Civil War were fought in Virginia. It was the most populated state of the Confederacy, thus giving the most troops. Its capital, Richmond, was also the capital of the Confederacy as well. And some of the most famous Confederate generals were from Virginia, such as Stonewall Jackson, Jeb Stuart, and of course, Robert E. Lee. As for those that are keeping up the statue, we see that a group known as the Steuben Historical Society fights to keep it up. They were actually inspired by various pro-Confederate groups such as the Daughters of Confederate Veterans who wanted to keep up these monuments to secure their power. Yes, despite what some crusty dickhead will tell you, Confederate monuments are a rather new thing. You see, many Confederate statues were established in the late 19th, early 20th century when the Jim Crow laws were beginning as a way to intimidate black people and for the white elites to show that who was in charge. And with Cleveland, they were willing to use a useful idiot to keep those power. Now granted, Cleveland isn't like Uncle Ruckus, he's just naive and realizes that he was wrong and tries to correct his mistakes. Also, another factor is that of Lester. Like any typical redneck, he was raised to honor the Confederacy. However, later he realizes he has nothing in common with the Confederate reenactors as they are just a bunch of wealthy pricks. This is actually historically accurate, believe it or not. Many soldiers in the Confederacy were poor whites who were tricked into fighting for the CSA to keep the establishment of slavery, even though that's the reason why they were poor in the first place. A sentiment that sadly still exists today. Overall, the Cleveland show actually presents this issue in a smart and funny way years before the topic actually became big. And yes, we're aware these places and characters are fictional, but if they're gonna pull from real world history, then they might as well get their facts straight. Again, I want to thank RTs for having me on for this one. It was actually a lot of fun. Well then, I hope you guys learned something new, and bye!
These episodes of Louder and Prouder and The Cleveland Show might have held the same premise, but their execution is where they greatly differ. LP gave an honest try of showcasing the realities of protesting racial inequalities, but it felt muddied over due to the overuse of the fantastical aspect of the show. And I felt like it wasted a golden antagonist while also trying to be heartfelt, but just left me and my friends laughing. Say what you will about The Cleveland Show, but at least it used real-world history as a reference for its episode's story, and its approach felt more genuine to me while also keeping me entertained. You can have your own opinions about these shows, so be sure to tell me which episodes you feel did a better job of tackling the issue of their founder's statue. Was there something I missed with The Cleveland Show? Or did Louder and Prouder actually pull it off? Let me know in the comments. And if you learned anything from Berg's seminar, trust me, I know I did. How about y'all check out his history channel? Because he's teaching the history we all never knew and needed to learn. Happy Juneteenth!